Let's get our first guests out on stage. Please give it up for former Irish internationals Fiona Steed and David Wallace. How are you? You managed to get your clothes back on?
Yeah.
You didn't quite see that.
I didn't.
Oh no,
yeah,
it's still there. Sorry,
that, yeah.
it's still there.
Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about.
They are very, very tight pants. We were just trying to.
Jesus.
We were just. Have a look. Have a look.
Ah, sure, jeez. The good old days, huh? Yeah.
You don't still get them on the summer holidays now?
Yeah, I'll never live that photo down. Yeah.
You don't want to really, do you?
If you have it, flaunt it.
Well,
you know,
exactly. Yeah. So we're going to get into the ruins of the weekend and where it all went horribly wrong. You two know each other pretty well?
Yeah.
We go back a good while, I suppose.
Yeah. Lions tours and everything.
Yeah, and I suppose we were both Ireland Sevens at the same time as well for a short period, so it was good. And a couple of Lions tours and various. Well, as a supporter as opposed to anything else, was good.
You were telling me a story about a certain Kiwi that you worshipped once upon a time.
Yeah, so I suppose David and I know him quite well, but John would know him obviously quite better.
If people don't know, you're married to John Hayes.
Yeah, he doesn't do publicity, so there we go.
We didn't want him anyways.
Nothing outside the park. No, wouldn't even go into Garryowen to see David, but there we go. No, back in a little story, I suppose 2008, my brother was down in the wonderful Cork University Hospital in ICU, serious head injury. So Ireland were playing New Zealand, and it's actually the most romantic thing that my husband has ever done for me. So unbeknownst to me, he went to David because I was a fan of Mr. McCaw for his rugby playing ability and everything else.
Everything else.
So he went to David, I don't know whether it was before or after the match, and asked him if he was like swapping the jersey, like could he have it? Now John he hasn't got any New Zealand jersey himself or anything else. So
how does that conversation go with John Hayes?
I don't remember. Was that his first? I think I played against him in his first cap, and I think he didn't swap it.
So I brought it actually, just the thing. So this is actually Richie McCaw's jersey, 2008 cap 68, I think.
Oh wow!
He's got it. The Richard McCaw.
It's all in black. Yeah.
68th or 63rd. Can't quite make it out. 68, but actually, yes. So it's one of my most prized possessions, and it's actually, without doubt, the most romantic thing that my husband has ever done. And David was the third person in that romantic story. So there we go. So love it, and thank you.
Did you realise at the time you were bringing the spark back to the Hayes-Steed relationship?
Forgotten it. Okay.
Did
you say you don't have one?
He's a romantic devil, that John Hayes.
Yeah.
No, I actually played against Richie in his first cap, so I got to take full credit for his career because he got man of the match that day. So I was obviously awful.
Yeah, and he went on to do okay.
He did all right,
And they've been causing us a lot of pain, by and large, since then. Yeah. So, you've had a few days to think about it. Everyone's trying to pick through the pieces and figure out where it all went wrong. Like, did it all start to go wrong from the moment the final whistle went at the Aviva Stadium? As almost Joe Schmidt has been hinting over the last few days, that they'd reached the summit and it was always going to be almost impossible to stay there? Or was it in the past month that they've made some terrible mistakes? Was it just pure bad luck? What are you putting it down to?
Sometimes you don't know what form. When it comes along and you're in the zone, you can't really put your finger on it. Obviously, you're doing all the processes to get there, but sometimes it doesn't work out. And equally, on the flip side, when it goes and leaves you, maybe when you feel you've reached that summit, that there's only one way to go down. I think there's probably a little bit more to it from an Irish point of view. I think we generally tend to I suppose, overreach in the 3 years, maybe coming up to a World Cup, because we're very, very good at managing our players, managing our teams. All our players are in the provinces, and we get coached very well. We get a lot of time off. In terms of injuries and the actual minutes that they do.
Does that mean then that those
cohesion is very strong?
That we should look at those achievements in the intervening 3 years slightly differently? That we should look at a Grand Slam and the victory over New Zealand?
I think you've got to be equally proud of those as well, I mean, I think what Joe has done in the 6 years has been fantastic, and you can't just rest all your weight on a World Cup. It's very important, but it's only one, I suppose, 6-7 week period in those 4 years. I mean, obviously you want to be performing at your best and just trying to peak at those times, but I suppose when you look at the other side, the tier 2 teams, they come up in value coming up to a World Cup. You look at Japan and all the talk about how many days, there's 200 and something odd days they've been together this year, and look how that has, I suppose, improved them, or certainly helped improve them. But
Ireland are sort of second after that. Like the way the IRFU manage their players.
Yeah, but maybe
you'll never get what Japan have, but they certainly have far more than what England have.
Yeah, I mean, and that's England generally do well in World Cups as well, don't they? They tend to get their players back from the clubs. There's a lot of wrestle in the other 4 years, but that World Cup year, they get their players back, and same with France as well. They usually come into a Six Nations with a couple of days training under their belts, and they're trying to go out and perform in a Six Nations, one of the biggest championships. So for them, a World Cup is a time they do build a bit of camaraderie, the cohesion is there, and that. So I think we do need to look at a World Cups a little bit differently and say, right, those other 4 years are separate. A World Cup is very different. We need to raise our game an awful lot going into a World Cup, because what we've done in the previous 3 years is great, but it needs to go another 10-15%.
Fiona, Joe Schmidt's made I think quite a few interesting comments since the defeat, and a lot of it maybe isn't taking a huge amount of personal responsibility. There's been a few excuses thrown out, such as the game's been called off the week before, and that you look at the teams that had their matches cancelled, they looked that little bit fresher. But when people look at his 6-7 years in charge now and the undoubted success, and you cannot take that away, do you think this is a year that people are always going to look back on with huge regret, huge amount of questions?
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of questions, and I think for all the good that was done in the intervening years, and you cannot take away from Grand Slams and Six Nations successes, it was fantastic. But November last year, we were best team of the world, best coach, world's best player, and then we just went downhill. And I think it was based on, I suppose our game was based on power, it was based on possession, it was based on set piece, and playing through the phases and being really, really efficient and really clinical at what we did. And there didn't seem to be then any need to evolve. So whether Joe didn't think there was a need to evolve, like we're winning, we're at the top of everything, why would you necessarily change anything? But when we got, I was going to say arses, I'll just say backsides, handed to us. Can we say arses? Handed to us in February, like up at the Aviva in the opening game of the Six Nations. Surely the alarm bells had to go. Surely there had to be something inside the management team and the players, heads that went, okay, that wasn't great. And we really, really struggled through the Six Nations, and we continued to play the same type of game. We tried something a little bit different during the Six Nations, and tried for it not to be just about box kicks, just about possession, just about power. And in the same then, in the warm-up game, so we thought we'd see something different. So you got to the end of the Six Nations, you sort of said, okay, well, we park that now. The lads went back to the provinces, Leinster got to, the Heineken final, out-muscled, outplayed by Saracens. They came back in together in June. So you just sort of thought, well, then you have to look at, then are we going to do something different? Because it didn't work for Leinster. It stopped working for Ireland, but they didn't evolve. And the same thing, we play England again and we get beaten again. So, as a coach, you have to be going, well, what can I do different? But there was no change really in game plan. And is that because, Dan Levy, I think, was phenomenal last year. I think he's an absolute animal as a player. So he wasn't there. Sean O'Brien, obviously, I think possibly wasn't at his peak anyway when he got injured. But you take away two real power players, real ball carriers, Henshaw.
And even going further back, if you were looking at potential Irish squads from 3 years ago and potential Irish back rows, probably would have expected Jamie Heaslip to still be around. Yeah. Like Jack Conan emerged, as well, actually didn't get there in the end.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I don't think we got found out then as to how, well, if you can meet brawn with brawn, then the bigger people are going to win, and that's what happened against England. We were out-muscled, out-fought, out-manoeuvred as well, and we just didn't develop from there, which is really, really disappointing. So will it be remembered this year as an abject failure? We lost to Japan, so that has to be taken for what it is, really. We beat Scotland.
And not a narrow loss to Japan, hanging on to get a bonus point at the end.
Absolutely.
And you look at the way New Zealand and England have changed their teams in the last year. You look at the team that we played in Twickenham a couple of years ago, and we beat well. it's totally changed since then. You know, look at their squad that they have now. New Zealand, I think, had something like 8 players playing the last day that lost to us in the Aviva. So these teams are changing and adapting, and I think we probably went back to type a little bit. We were too, you know, I think when that team was announced, you could have picked that team, you know, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago.
That's
anyway.
the point, though. He can't blame that he didn't have the team that he wanted, because he had the exact team that he wanted, bar maybe Levy, you know, which may have been in with a shout. Maybe Bundyaki would have come in. Henshaw obviously wasn't quite fit, but he had everybody else. So I suppose the
maybe it's a hangover from the last World Cup where he didn't have those players,
yeah.
You know, and he was a bit paranoid about, you know, I don't have my key leaders now, and we didn't have the strength and depth. But maybe this time we did have guys who could come in and who were more on form. To do a job.
Like, strength and depth is an interesting phase, because it's something that was brought up a lot over the last year, 18 months, and there was a feeling that Ireland did have strength and depth, in that we had numbers and we could all name the 3 or 4 players contending for every position. Now, Joe Schmidt never gave a lot of those players a huge amount of game time, so when it came to a situation at the World Cup and form wasn't right, probably couldn't quite trust them, but also did enough of those players, when they did get chances, put their hands up to put some pressure on.
No, well,
maybe not enough, but there was a few, certainly. But I don't know. I do think the whole selection thing was, you know, would have mattered massively to the outcome.
At the end of the day,
against New Zealand, I don't know if and are we critiquing that a little bit too fine, and more so than maybe the style that we've played with over the last few years, and you know, certainly the way we were playing in the World Cup was, I mean, it was a very flat approach we brought to our attack. You know, we were static. You know, which I think, I don't know, is that from the players? I mean, I doubt it's something that they were being coached to do. So, you know, why did that change? Why were we suddenly becoming less confident in what we were doing?
Would it not have had to have been what they were coached to do? Because if they weren't doing what they were coached to do, surely somebody else would have been brought in.
Well, you know, like it was, you do this and then you do this and then you do this, and if there is a break, you know, I mean, it's pretty prescriptive, to be honest, as to the way that they're coached.
But the running styles, you know, running with a bit of depth, running onto the ball rather than, you know, being static. There was so many times in the World Cup where we just didn't know, looked like we knew what we were doing or comfortable with what we were doing. And was that a confidence dip for some reason? Maybe on the high of the year before, and then things not going right this year, and that confidence starts to eat away at you. But I think it gives us a chance now to totally look at what we're doing. And building up our skill sets, because you look at New Zealand, you know, you put them under pressure, they still have the skill set to make an offload, to get a ball away. Same with Japan. You know, I think we this can act as a catalyst now to totally maybe change the way that we view the style we've done. And you know, if Andy Farrell had taken over from quite a, you know, successful World Cup campaign, maybe that pressure to stick with what they were doing is you know, stronger. And to live in Joe's shadow a little bit more. But now he maybe has a chance to kind of put his own stamp on it a little bit more, say, right, that didn't work. What is working in the world rugby now? We look at Japan, look at the way the style that they play. But one, it's really good to watch, obviously, and everyone would love to see that. But it's also effective. And if you build up that pace and that skill set, New Zealand have been doing it all their lives, and that's why they're the best in the world. And I think we need to look at it a little bit more like that, rather than just... I don't know, just trying to be really constructive in what we're doing, and then ultimately when it comes to World Cup, maybe in being a bit easy to read and easy to figure out.
But I think, you know, that it's a huge, big piece, though, isn't it, around? So if we look at the under-20s that played down here at Irish Independent Park last year, they were absolutely fabulous, and they played with that abandonment, they played with that skill set, they ran the ball, they offloaded, you know, they were a smaller team than most of the teams that they played against, and they were exceptional. And my thoughts at the time is, jeepers, is this going to be coached out of them now? You know, because they were so good and so effective and played a fantastic brand of rugby. So we know that they can do it at that age. And then do they come into systems where, you know, you're not necessarily playing what's in front of you? And I remember, you know, talking to Stuart Lancashire once about, like, his whole vision of playing what's in front of you and unstructured rugby when he came to Leinster. And I'm not speaking for him, but I think there was a lot of work to be done in sort of coaching the structure out of Leinster. Yeah. Do you know? Because it's the mindset, it's the percentage game, it's looking at, well, this is what we do. But Japan, case in point, I mean, I think comparing us to New Zealand, like, New Zealand are born with rugby balls in their hands. It's their sport. It's their one thing. But Japan is case in point, that if you get people really, really fit, they obviously were training in the right zones, in the right temperatures, absolutely all year. But they outplayed us, and they were a joy to watch. And on, you know, after 45, 50 minutes on last Sunday, then the World Cup was over. But up till then, they were absolutely fantastic.
It's interesting you bring up Stuart Lancaster, because Brian O'Driscoll was on off the ball earlier, and Gordon Darcy mentioned it as well, that a question of maybe did Lancaster's arrival at Leinster unsettle Ireland, because suddenly the Leinster players were back playing that type of rugby that you mentioned. They're very much enjoying it, and they go back into Ireland camp, and while they had very much enjoyed the first few years of Joe Schmidt's rugby because it was successful, suddenly they've been forced to go back to that more prescriptive style. There's not quite as much freedom to express yourself, and we're going to read deeply into everything, but maybe that was the factor, that Johnny Sexton loves to play Stuart Lancaster's style of rugby, and if he can prove that it's successful, well, why does he need to change it when he goes back to Ireland?
It's a massive point. Like, you look at Leinster and the way they play, you know, sometimes they're like the All Blacks in terms of their offloading game and that. And Munster to a lesser extent, but, you know, Stephen Larkham's coming in. He's trying to change that around as well. And by all accounts, the players are loving what the type of style he's bringing. So, you know, if you have teams like that feeding into an Irish system, let's embrace it rather than trying to change and deconstruct what they're doing. Yeah, I suppose it's I know I was likening it to somebody recently. I'm not a very good table tennis player, but if I play somebody who's really good, I'll try and bring them down to my level. So sometimes I'm wondering, were we doing that a little bit, that the coaches weren't giving us the credit, the players the credit, the skill set that we have to you know, go out and show the skills that we have in the international stage, like we're doing in the provincial stages. So I don't know, our provincial teams. So yeah, I don't know. I think maybe giving more credit to players and being, as you say, that abandonment, you know, like they're showing at under 20s age, and bringing that through. Because if you can do it at that age, you know, why does it stop?
I'm not sure if we'll ever hear the full story of exactly what happened this year, but I'm sure over the coming weeks and months, players will be out talking. We'll get a little bit of insight into what they felt went wrong. You've obviously, and I hate to bring it up, David, experienced the World Cup that went horribly wrong back in 2007. And we actually have heard, I think, day by day, how pissed off the players ended up being. Like, in the midst of that World Cup, knowing and having a sense of this is turning out to be a disaster. Do players speak up? Like, can players speak up during a World Cup when you're in camp, when you're in a hotel, and say, actually, if we keep, after the Japan game, do you think any of the players stood up and said, if we keep going this way, we're heading for an early exit?
Yeah, players do. It happened in 2007, you know, and we did try and change it, but unfortunately it's probably maybe it's a little bit too late at that stage, you know. I think the form had probably gone at that stage. Confidence in what we were doing was down a little bit.
Downer in your boots.
Yeah, pretty much.
Georgia.
Yeah. Well, we were lucky to win that one, and technically we probably didn't win that one, but
you beat the Tier 2 team, and you're proud of that.
We beat the Tier 2 team, and we lost to, you know, 2 semi-finalists in our pool stages. So that's,
and the hotel was the worst thing ever.
It's bad when you're losing, when you're explaining you're losing, isn't that what they say? Yeah. But yeah, look, that was a tough year, and then I suppose you had all the kind of the rumours and the, you know, French media getting on top of you as well too. But I suppose we turned that around a little bit as well, and we kind of had, I think we had a rumour of the day. Dunners used to do a rumour of the day at the top of the bus as well too. I think was one.
What was the best one?
I think Jess O'Gara had moved in with Peter Stringer anyway. That was one of them. Jordan Murphy had enough, and he'd gone home, but he was obviously Dunners does this at the top of the bus, so Jordan was down the back, and he goes, I fucking wish I was. And then all the other ones. But yeah, look, I think I was fighting with John actually. Yeah, so we got a bit of crack out of that.
John fighting is just
So we were abusing each other left, right, and centre just to kind of play up to. Especially if the media were around, we'd try and act up. But yeah, I think you got to make the best of what you got, I suppose. And yeah, look, it's World Cups have been always, I suppose, disappointing for us, and that was a tough one, you know, not to be getting out of your group. And it eats away with you. But look, for the players, as they come back and you know, they get a week off and they're back into it, it's the next match. So for a lot of those players who would have been peaking, felt that maybe they had a chance, it's now they go back to their provinces and that they're facing into Champions Cup, and you can't be licking your wounds too long. So you get back on the horse, and I suppose they play for their places, and it's a whole new regime with Ireland as well too. So, Mike Catt coming in, hopefully we can change things around there.
I think it's just on the coaching bit you're saying about Mike Catt coming in, which hopefully add a bit of impetus. Obviously, Andy Farrell is still there, but not to harp back to 07. But if you look at it, poor Eddie limped on. Had a disastrous 08. And then more or less the same group of players won the Grand Slam. You look at what Wales did, they obviously had a disastrous 2007 as well. Got rid of Jenkins, brought in Gatland straight away, won the Six Nations in 08. So I think you can. You absolutely can do it with largely the same amount of players. But I suppose the worry isn't it, that, or maybe Andy Farrell hasn't been given a voice to date. Maybe he has something else to bring out now.
Well, that's one of the big questions, I guess, in that what was Andy Farrell's role over the past year as this was somewhat disintegrating? Was he trying to raise issues and Joe Schmidt said, you'll have your time, I'm the head coach, what I say goes? Or was actually Andy Farrell very much thinking, you know what, everything's going to be great, in which case we're going to be a bit worried?
You don't know unless you're on the inside, really, do you? Yeah.
You don't know whether, Joe is so meticulous that he actually wanted to coach every section of every piece. That might just be the rumour that's out there, and I'm sure, Andy has his own slant on it. But I think the IRFU last year, when it came out that maybe Joe was going to go after this World Cup, they thought they were absolutely on to a winner because, we have the world, coach of the year. He's got his assistant, seamless transition, continuity because and now. Maybe there's a question. I'm not saying there's a question, but maybe there is a question around, okay, is this sort of continuity a great thing? And how do you break the psyche then of, obviously there'll be a few lads will probably be cut. Obviously Rory's retiring anyway. And, it's how do you get that new voice? Because Greg Feek is going as well. So, is Simon staying, staying on? Do we know?
As far as I know,
so,
yeah.
Do you know? So if there's a few new voices coming in, then is John Fogarty going in as
John is going in for
scrum?
Greg Feek,
so he'll add something new and different as well. So yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it will come from the provinces as well and how they do. So one of the downside, one of the upsides, I suppose, being out so early is that the international players are back a little early, come to Champions Cup, hopefully get back to winning ways. I suppose we're up against English teams as well, like Saracens. They'll be pretty much away. They'll just be back. They'll have a hangover from the World Cup because they're there a little bit longer. So hopefully we can steal a bit of a march there and
as
bring
long as
that.
they haven't won the World Cup when they come, that would
Well, that'll
be
even better for our provinces. But yeah. So
what do you think Andy Farrell should do then over the next couple of months? Because if we want to try and break this cycle, and Joe Schmidt touched on it, that maybe we were all just too obsessed with getting to a World Cup semi-final, that actually for the past year, instead of taking it game by game, all the focus was on, now this is what he's saying, all the focus was on a World Cup quarter-final. If we want to get away from that, does Andy Farrell go, you know what, this Six Nations is my first Six Nations, it's experimental, I'm going to try some things, stick with me, we might lose a few matches, or because the World Cup's been such a disaster, is he under pressure actually straight away to go and get results?
Yeah, I think he's under less pressure because I think if they were coming off a high of a good World Cup, or if they got to the semi-final or final or whatever with Joe, that I think he'd be under more pressure to stick to what Joe had done or instilled in the team and continue that and maybe develop a little bit. But now I think it gives him a bit of breathing room, it's a bit of a catalyst for change, because that disappointment will say, well, look, we need to change things around, and maybe the players will step up a little bit more. And if they weren't happy with that style or enjoying it, as we're saying, like they are with Leinster or Munster, or Ulster or wherever, Connacht, that they can bring that style into the Irish team and maybe they have their voices back a bit, because at the end of the day, it's those guys who are out in the field want to be happy with what they're doing. So maybe it will open a window for that bit of change.
Maybe I shouldn't be surprised with the way Joe Schmidt has been talking since the defeat, considering the late bus to Scotland was still being brought up a couple of years later. But talking about teams having the weekend off, about maybe our focus was wrong, he's making excuses in what all we've ever heard from an Irish camp over the last 6 years is it is a no excuse culture. The players get away with nothing. That you have to stand up and explain yourself. True. Are you surprised in a way that he hasn't come out almost straight away and said, this is on me?
I'm not surprised. No. I haven't, particularly seen him accept blame over the last 6 years. And to be fair, there's been very few. There hasn't been. There's been very few reasons to do it. I think there was a choice to be made in the Samoa game, as to who he played. So he chose pretty much to play, a lot of his frontline people with it. I mean, Johnny Lacey was telling us there is that New Zealand had a training game that would equal any game on that that middle week that they didn't get to play. There was a lot of talk beforehand, and I suppose what gave me a glimmer of hope that we might actually do something was perhaps the rustiness of the likes of Italic and stuff, who hadn't had a lot of, and he's pivotal, that he hadn't had a lot of rugby. So. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I think, it's done now.
I think he fully believed what he was doing, and probably still does believe that what he was doing was right. And I think he, in that position, he probably needed.
That is fatal error then.
Well, possibly, yeah. But I think you don't make it to that top unless you do believe in what you're doing. And obviously, it brought him great success and brought Ireland great success. So I mean, there were probably a lot of good things in what they were doing. But ultimately, in this 6-week window, or maybe this year, this maybe 9-month window, it just wasn't working for them, and maybe sticking, and maybe that's the fatal error. But believing in something, but maybe you're too close to it at that stage.
But thinking it's all going to come right on the night, and as like I said at the start,
And we all sort of we were in Dublin last week at the Borgosh Theatre, and Brian O'Driscoll and Keith Wood, and everybody's there, and there was a definite sense of in Joe we trust. Everyone had a sense of. Maybe, just maybe, this guy has something there.
But I think so. But I think once once we lost to England in the opening game of the Six Nations, he should have just gone, okay, now I use this Six Nations to make sure that I have 31 players for the World Cup, that I do throw Carberry in, that I do look at, Scannell or Cronin or whoever, and that Larmour gets much more game time, and that, so because it was gone at that stage, so. And there would have been justification then to do that. Like you were saying, should Andy Farrell do that now? Like he still needs to sort of get back on the horse and get back on the winning ways. So the time to do it was once it was obvious that the Joe way it just didn't work in the Six Nations.
Was Carberry underused?
I don't know. I think he obviously was carrying a bit of an injury as well coming into it. So that I suppose compromise matters. But again, I think we have the players. I honestly think that. But it's getting them to do the right things maybe and train them in such a way. I think otherwise you're just moving positions around the Titanic or deck chairs around the Titanic. So I think the whole focus of, as you say, Fiona, when we lost to England and that Welsh game as well was a big telltale. I think that was nearly a worse loss because we were just so overpowered that day. And things went wrong, and a little bit similar to what happened against New Zealand. We were making errors, unforced errors, and we seemed to have lost our mojo, whatever that is. That confidence had ate away. So maybe trying to work on that side of things and asking maybe they just didn't ask the players enough. Like how do you see the style that we should be playing, or where we these chinks, and maybe that's.
But there was no evolution though.
Yeah.
At all, really.
But is that down to Joe and being saying, well, this is the dictatorial way, this is the way we're going to play? I don't know.
But if you're saying we have the players, I guess it must be.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. So look, I think that's a big opportunity.
Gordon Darcy said today actually that, and again, everybody's sort of speculating and trying to guess, and people will feed things out over the next little while, that maybe the players had become too close, that culture that's in a great dressing where people call each other out and can take being called out, that maybe that had been lost somewhere, that actually because it was the same group of players for so long that it had gone a little bit stale.
Yeah, I don't know.
Have you been in dressing rooms like that? Where actually someone clipping around the ear if needs be, that's gone?
I think that familiarity usually brings that kind of style where you're more comfortable to talk to each other and critique each other constructively, and I think that's where it's got to be coming from. I think if you're giving out to somebody but you're not doing it in a constructive way, it obviously doesn't work. So I think that trust builds up the more you play with people, and you know that it's coming from a good place, that everyone's trying to get better. So I'd say it's nearly the opposite, actually. You know, the closer you are, the more you're willing to tell somebody, look, maybe that's not the right way, or this is the way we want to do it, and everyone becomes a bit more of a leader, a bit more familiar with each other.
I feel bad. I didn't come to Cork to look at all these glum faces in the audience.
There's no crack here, like, it's desperate.
It's all Joe Schmidt's fault.
That's our job.
It's all Joe Schmidt's fault. No, we're blaming Joe Schmidt for everything right now.
No.
Let's talk about the positives from this World Cup then. Wasn't as bad as 07?
He wasn't as bad. We got out of our group. Thanks for that. New Zealand is hopefully going to beat England at the weekend as well too.
And Japan were a joy to watch.
Japan were a joy. Yeah, and it shows what can be done with very limited. Like a 38-year-old second row flying around, you know, and the pace that they were playing with the skills that they showed. It should be.
Some people can still play international rugby at 38. You know, so not everybody hangs up early.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Takes the easy option. Wow.
That's my point, though. He was.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Look, I think there was. I mean, I think last World Cup, I think New Zealand weren't the biggest team in it, yet they showed how to play rugby with skill and guile and agility and a bit of power, you know. And like, I don't think World Rugby has caught up with them yet. Japan maybe took a leaf out of the book and said, well, let's try it that way, and look at the success they've had. So hopefully it's a change for the better. You know, playing. I mean, because it's a joy to watch when you're watching that Japan play.
It is like sevens, you know, with 15 aside. And I was watching it in Bruff on Sunday morning before we went out training the young lads, and like there wasn't a line out for ages. Do you know what I mean? The quick throws and all the different things, and like there was hardly a ruck. It would have really suited me. I hated rucks anyway, but. Yes, I mean that was really good. I think. I'd love
if we go back to the 90s. You know, the put in when there was a knock on. Literally, as the ball is still rolling, the two packs are forming up, and the ball is being put. You know, somebody's picking up the ball, and it's gone within 5 seconds. The ball was in and out of ruck after a knock on. It just speeds the game up, you know. And I think maybe World Rugby could look at that. You know, there is so much downtime. You know, and obviously there's GMOs now as well too, and they're getting a little bit better with that in terms of speeding it up, but. Scrums for me are oftentimes a blight on the game, where you could have 3 minutes after a knock on and you're still, you know, resetting a scrum. And
very dull. I hope there's no props in the audience, is there?
Yeah, don't let a few of them.
But and I think
you've watched the under-20s a lot as well. You mentioned it there.
Yeah.
Do you feel many of them are ready to step up like as quickly as February?
Do you know what? I don't think they are. And I think that's part of the culture here as well. So if you're good enough in New Zealand, you're there, you know, and you're sort of straight on at 2021. The same in France. They've taken a huge risk on. Why can't I think of the fly half Intimac? Yeah. Penno, like, and they allowed them to learn during the Six Nations and make their mistakes and everything. And they were great, and they're going to be even better come next year's Six Nations, whereas we have a culture of we'll get them into the academies now, and then like James Ryan was the exception probably, you know, that he went almost straight through into professionalism, so we don't have that culture of doing that. It possibly needs to be done a little bit more. I think having that, so you look at Larmour, who again was very similar, went in soon after that, and obviously Ringrose went in, but by and large they're sort of a couple of years later, but you know, they're a joy to watch. And like Ringrose just didn't get enough. He just didn't get enough ball that he could do any sort of thing with. And you know, everybody wants to be Larmour. Like my little lad, he's 7, and you know, he's been practicing box kicks all year like Conor Murray. It's just they see what they want to see, right? And then,
does he not want to be like his dad?
No. No. So and then on
His
Sunday.
was very good at box kicking, by the way.
Was he? Yeah. I don't think he has the flexibility in the hip, to be honest. But look,
there's a thought, though, isn't it?
Well,
let's just leave it there.
You got dirty minds.
Wow.
Oh God, this is terrible. Luckily, he doesn't watch. He doesn't watch.
No, we get it. Everyone gets it.
You're labouring the point, Stan. Yeah. There we go.
God, I've just gone on someplace completely else there now. But anyway, so all year Bill was practicing his box kicks. So that's what he was seeing, you know. So I actually set up John as the scrum. you know, so John would be the whole scrum and Bill would box kick over him. And he's a lefty, okay, but so then on Saturday, like he was doing these little chip kicks, he had little tiny rugby balls, he was doing it around the kitchen, and I was like, so who are you? I don't know. And I was like, are you Conor Murray? No. I was like, well, who are you pretending to be? Can I say to New Zealand fullback? And I was like, well, you can. But, you know, that's the thing. So he sees people doing this really exciting stuff. Like Bowden Barrett was obviously fabulous. And that's what they look at. And that's hugely cultural. And like, but that's what he then wanted to be. And so he wanted to stop being Conor Murray and box kicking. And he wanted to go and do little chip kicks and like looking at Richie McCaw. And I mean, I have to say credit to Rog, though, for sorting out Richie McCaw into the family.
It's all down to Rog.
It's all down to Rog, okay?
He doesn't like to talk about it, though.
The other,
sorry.
You know, so, but like 2 years ago, he wouldn't have been capable of that. And he wouldn't have had that mentality. And he really seems to have, you know, hardened up mentally as well as physically.
Are we blaming Rog again for another World Cup?
Let's blame Rog. Well, I didn't blame him for 07 now, so
well, yeah, I am. So
are you blaming Rog for 07? Yeah, okay. Well, we're in Cork. I thought we'd get lynched for mentioning.
I'm not, of course.
No.
Yeah.
No, but it just shows like mixing that innate ability to play rugby and to have a go with a little bit of structure and a little bit of coaching, as opposed to possibly what we've done, which is the other way around, is structure and coach the innate ability into a very process-orientated piece. Is that a bit technical now?
No, that was... Listen, we're all still thinking about John Hayes' hip
Box kicking. Box kicking.
It's going to be hard to get out of our minds, I'll be honest, for the next little while.
I'll leave it, yeah, as I said.
Just before I let you go, and we will look ahead to the semi-finals in a little while, and Johnny Lacey's going to join us as well to talk about his experience of working with a lot of the Tier 2 nations over in Japan over the last little while. One of the big decisions that Andy Farrell is going to face is at out half, and how much experience he gives to Joey Carbery. Now, maybe there's a way around this, and he plays Carbery at full back and gives Johnny Sexton another couple of years, building towards maybe bowing out of the lines. But listen, Johnny Sexton ain't going to be around in 4 years' time, so if we're talking about building towards a World Cup.
Well, according to Fiona, what is he going to be 37 in the next World Cup? Yeah, so that's he's still a young man, isn't he?
His hip action is quite good, I heard.
I think he's actually had more problems with his hips than John. But so I don't know. Obviously, Sexton has been an absolute class player since he took over from Rog, and that whole interface where Rog was thinking he was still there and was Sexton was coming up, and that whole battle was fantastic and fascinating viewing if you weren't Rog, I suppose. Whereas now somebody needs to be the Sexton to Sexton. Someone needs to be that fella who'll stand over him. Was it 04? In Lansdowne Road, and just that goes, yeah, I've tackled you, I've nailed you, I've scored the try. And they need to step up, so it shouldn't be a case of, well, we move Sexton now. But so Carbery or Byrne, or the younger Byrne, who I actually think is going to be the best of the lot of them, needs to step up and go, yeah, I want your jersey. Because there's been too much of an homage, and rightly so, to the World Player of the Year, and but they need to take it off him rather than somebody else taking it away from him.
You don't hand over the jersey. You've got to earn it. Yeah, exactly. You don't just move him to one side. If he's the best player, you pick Sexton. If they both have to earn it. Yeah, if he's not still up to the standard, then obviously the young guys take over.
While we're in Cork, would you bring Simon Zebo back?
Absolutely.
Do you want Simon Zebo back?
He's here.
Do you know what? I don't think we wouldn't have won if Simon Zebo was there. Do you know what I mean? Sorry, I'm from Tipperary, right? Okay, so there we go. Maybe if Dennis Leamy was there.
Leame's a great player, of course.
But it's that openness to allow and to have a little bit of it. Donica Ryan, actually. Nina, if he was there alongside as well. But I think there needs to be a look at that. But it's not just about Zebo, but it's the whole concept of bringing other people in.
Yeah, I think it's probably unlikely. We are here tonight with thanks to Heineken, official worldwide partner of Rugby World Cup 2019 Japan. We're going to let Fiona and David go for just a few minutes. They will be back to look ahead to the semi-finals alongside Johnny Lacey, but please give them a warm round of applause. We'll let you go, guys.